Joining me now is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakow. Esther, royal tours are never dull, and increasingly there's these conversations around the historical links between monarchy and slavery. How did the King handle those conversations on this tour?
I think this tour was quite a success, actually, in how he handled, the calls for slavery reparation. You have to understand that the king has to strike a very fine balance when it comes to these sorts of conversations. He has to be considerate in his response, but also considered. And he often talks about actually reconciliation as opposed to reparations. When you hear these when you read these headlines of the UK owing certain countries billions, if not trillions of pounds for its role in the transatlantic slave trade, you have to have someone like the king saying, actually, there's a different path, because that's not only unsustainable, it's completely impractical. And, there are all sorts of hurdles associated with that. So the king has had to deal with this for basically the entirety of his royal life, and he's no novice to this, and he handled it once again like a seasoned pro. He was considerate and considered as well, and there've always been calls for him to outright apologize for the slave trade, which I find bizarre because he wasn't there. He literally had nothing to do with it, and I think the idea of asking someone to apologize on behalf of what the ancestors did is both asinine and ridiculous. But he is always, making sure that his focus is on moving on and reconciling and healing the wounds of the past. He does acknowledge it without, outright saying that we should pay reparations or somehow carry this burden of our ancestors. What people did in the past is what they did, and they bear the responsibility solely. So, the king was actually he handled it quite well. And I was quite impressed by that. We have to remember that the king paused his cancer treatment to travel all the way to Australia. He did take some significant physical burden to make this trip. So it was important that the headlines were actually not something that seemed like a wasted trip. And so how he handled this was very telling. I mean, I'm sure we'll get onto it, but the senator Lydia Thorpe that basically accosted him. He was very calm and cool and collected, and that's exactly what you expect of the king. These are the kinds of things that even a typical politician would struggle with. And so you can really see the benefit of having sort of the royal family and people that are above the fray that can handle it in probably the most diplomatic way possible.
And you're right, and we will go to that right now. It was the most unedifying performance. Lydia Thorpe this week during an audience with the King at Parliament House. Have a look.
You committed genocide against our people. Give us our land back. Give us what you stole from us. Our bones, our skulls, our babies, our people. You destroyed our land. Give us a treaty. We want a treaty in this country. You are a genocider. This is not your land. This is not your land. You are not my kids. You are not our kids.
Obviously, that outburst made international headlines. How was it viewed from the UK?
To be honest, it kind of just seemed like a nutter that was just completely off her rocker, really. And this is not something new. The king has always had to deal with hecklers and people protesting. The "Not My King" movement gained traction literally right after his coronation. But again, this is a senator. This is not some unemployed individual that probably doesn't shower very often from the depths of England. This is a senator. This is an elected official. So that kind of added to how unedifying it was. But again, people don't take behavior like that seriously, mainly because, one, it's disgraceful, but also you can see that she lacks her knowledge of history is quite poor, saying things like, you're a genocidist and you stole our baby skulls, and you did all of this. Like, no, he didn't. He wasn't there. And many people are going to say, why should he have to deal with this? Why should he constantly have to be heckled for something he literally had no involvement in? And it seemed like she had more of a gripe with actual local politicians than with the king. It just seemed to be her moment to sort of grab headlines, and of course she took it. But again, these are the kinds of things that don't make people take her or her cause or her movement seriously. And it's this is why I stress the importance of having people like the king and members of the royal family, and how in tune they are with public sentiment, that they don't react to this, that they don't shout back, that they just, take it on the chin. The king has always said that, the Republican movement, again, is a decision for Australian people. He said this is a choice that they have to make, whether they want to stay with the monarchy or become a republic. And he's never sort of tried to assert this sort of control or acted like he's high and mighty. He's always had a very humble spirit to him, just like his mother did. So it is quite encouraging to see how the king reacted to this, but it's also quite sad. I don't think Lydia Thorpe is not going to be a shining moment in her history, that's for certain.
No, and I also think the Australian taxpayer wasn't particularly fond of that performance. But a great piece in the UK Telegraph this week about, there are these tricky issues around royalty, but royal tours can still be joyous. And I think we definitely saw that here in Australia. The crowds in Sydney were exuberant. What's your view?
Absolutely. And the royal family has this unofficial mantra, which is when they go on tours around the world, they want to leave something positive. They don't always want to have, or they certainly don't always want to have this, but they don't want to have a lasting legacy of something negative. So the cheering crowds, actually, what we can't call them walkabouts, but really they are walkabouts, speaking to people, accepting toys and gifts. When they went to the Anglican church in Sydney, they received toy koalas and other items to be given to Princess Charlotte, Louis, and George. And these are the kinds of joyous things that actually have a lasting impact. That the royal family is not just sort of this negative, maniacal dictatorship, as many will try to paint them as. They're just, normal people that are going around meeting normal people. They're professional ambassadors. And when you see these sorts of scenes, it's quite heartwarming. When the king and queen landed in Sydney, they spent a day resting because, again, the king and the queen were probably jet lagged, and he has paused his cancer treatment, which is important to emphasize. But the next day, they were out and about in church, meeting the public, and these are the kinds of things that you want to see, because it shows that they actually also have the human touch. They're not awkward. They're not, socially inept. They actually like being around people, and they like interacting with people, and people really appreciate this. There were people that had quite elderly people that had met the Queen beforehand as well when she made a royal tour in Australia, as well as then Prince Charles and Princess Diana as well. So you have generations of people that have always come out to meet the royal family and enjoy these experiences. And I think these are the things that matter.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely they do. Now on to the Sussexes and some pretty fiery comments from legendary magazine editor Tina Brown. Amongst other things, she said that Meghan had the worst judgment, and she joked that she was the perfectionist at getting it all wrong. Here's a snippet.
The trouble with Meghan is that she has the worst judgment of anyone in the entire world. I mean, she's flawless about getting it all wrong. And all of her ideas are total crap, unfortunately. And because he's so naive, he's the lamb to the slaughter in this situation. I mean, he was terribly impressed by Meghan. He thought that she persuaded him that she was the savvy Hollywood wheeler dealer, who could come in and make them stars and all the rest of it. And he just sort of blindly followed her like a child, really. And unfortunately, she made every mistake in the book.
That was quite something. Now, how did all this come about? What else did she have to say?
Well, so we have to remember that Tina was the editor of Vanity Fair from 1979 to 1982, but she really sort of got her stride in the later 90s and 2000s when she effectively identified the star to be. That was Princess Diana. We know that she wrote her biography in 2007 that became a New York Times bestseller. So she's a seasoned veteran when it comes to all things intimate knowledge about the royal family and how to make them a success. And so for her to say that Meghan has the worst judgment is quite interesting. One of the things she did say as well was that Meghan often asks for advice and then just does what she wants. And I think that's where this comment stems from. It's like, what's the point of asking for advice if you're just going to do what you want? And the fact that, Harry was terribly impressed with her and saw her as this kind of strong, independent, really intelligent, savvy woman. And she effectively became the symbol of his out, him leaving the royal family and doing his own thing. I don't think that him leaving the royal family with Meghan was something that just happened in the spur of the moment. I think he'd always wanted to find a way to carve out his own path. So it's quite interesting that she's made these comments because, many people have often talked about Meghan Markle being controlling, bullying, quite incompetent, not knowing what she's doing. And she's just kind of someone on a power trip that gets sucked into this idea of the strong, independent woman that Hollywood tries to shove down our throats. And to have someone on the inside that actually knows members of the royal family and has worked with them to say that she has terrible judgment is really quite telling.
I thought they were absolutely extraordinary comments. Esther Krakouo, thank you so much for joining us.